And Senator Angus King is at the NATO summit in Lithuania, and his colleagues addressed the foreign press earlier. We received the audio of his response, and while King didn't talk about Ukraine's President Zelensky's frustrations about when his country can join NATO, King did talk about how strong NATO is because of their dedication to world peace. During this trip, he and his colleagues have met with many world leaders. King has toured the Pobrad training area with U.S. Army leaders and has gotten updates on Russia's attack on Ukraine. He says he hopes the work being done will help combat Russia's aggression.
And what I've seen here over the last 2 days is people with a true passion for democracy, for human rights, and for peace. And I want to emphasize and conclude on that thought. NATO is an institution that is absolutely dedicated to peace, not aggression, not territorial expansion, but establishing peace in Europe and in the entire world. And that's been what's so important about this conference that I've seen as we've visited with all the various members and countries that we've talked to today, including the President of the United States.
Senator King's office says he will be holding a virtual press conference tomorrow.